See me, Bob?
Yes.
All right. I'm sorry, I'm not going to stand up. 2 years ago, I had knee replacement surgery, which is one of the knee replacement surgery. I got a good doctor. The doctor told me 2 years ago that once I fix your right one, your left one, which is not as bad as the other one, is going to go down. And I said, no way. I feel fine with that. Well, that has changed. So I'm going to have to go back in. So I'm trying to walk less and less.
So it's something you might need.
But I do have I'm on the schedule, but I just don't know if I have the nerve to do it. I'm on the schedule afterwards. But we'll see. I texted my doctor. Well, we have other people in the church who just had knee replacement surgery. One of them is Patrick Marsden. She's been on the verge. So I texted her yesterday and said, well, I've been praying about my knee because my knee's really acting up, but God isn't answering my prayer request, so I've been praying for your knee. How are you doing? She texted back, not great. So, she just got the surgery. You don't do well for a couple weeks anyway. The 9th commandment. Why don't we turn to Exodus 20 and just look at it, but I've written it down for you. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Exodus 20. I just want you to see it there in God's Word. Verse 16. This is right after you shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Now, I'm sorry, I have not attended any of your classes, but can someone sort of describe to me the commands at the second half of the Ten Commandments? Most of them are dealing with what relationship? Others, right? It's sort of an exposition in some sense of what does it mean to love your neighbor? These are the things you need to avoid. The first part of the Ten Commandments, the first series of commands, are all about your relationship with God, vertically. This is about loving your neighbor. And I thought about asking you just, before we look at this in verses that will sort of spell this out further. When you hear this command, what do you think it's trying to say? What is it trying to forbid? What is it concerned about? Okay, very good point. It is true, and particularly we'll see this. It does feel like the most direct application is if you were called to be a witness in a court case, you're obligated to speak the truth. You cannot be a false witness. You cannot share a testimony. And there are verses, and that's certainly in the course. What do we do in a courtroom typically when you're a witness? Right? Take an oath, usually on a Bible. Right? Swear to tell the truth. So certainly that is one application. What else do you think about? Slander. So you slander somebody else. You basically tell somebody else about someone, which is gossip, right? But what makes it worse is it's not true. Or it's partly true. Or it's so that's a problem. But it's twisted a little bit, right? So we gossip, that's bad, but we slander. Okay, what else do we do? What? Don't lie. Okay, so I think some people would apply this further. It's not just in a court of law. It's not just about slander. It's lying of all kinds. You expand it out. Any deviation from the truth all things, right? So the authorities have to come in, the leaders of the church have to come in, or leaders of the association, and now you've got two different stories, right? And it's very difficult to adjudicate. And of course, what happens when we violate this command in the culture, in our neighborhood, in our homes, in the church? What happens to the community when this isn't followed? No trust. You don't trust anybody. It's hard to have a relationship with someone you don't fully trust. It's hard to be in a room when you know people are gossiping about you or slandering. All right, let's hack this out even further. I'm going to assign some of you a text. Now, Bob, can you look at Proverbs 14:25? Bob, I want you to, everybody's name is Bob. Bob the second. You look at Exodus 23, 1-3. Joe, look up Leviticus 5:1, Deuteronomy 19:50-21, Ephesians 4:15. Melissa, right behind you, Melissa, your name? Andrew. You could look up Ephesians 4:25. And then Kim, Matthew 26.
Why not just say, why have
That's a great question. I'm going to hold off. I hope I can answer that before the end of it. That's a great question. All right. I want you to listen to these texts. I want some of you to comment on these texts. And if you don't, I will ask questions until you do. I'm going to clue right out on you. Bob,
A truthful witness saves lives. The one that breathes out lies is deceitful.
so should we react to that verse? What do you hear?
Like some of these commandments, there's two sides in this verse specifically to it. Not just don't lie, but tell the truth.
Absolutely. It's very important. If you only treat the commandments as, okay, don't do this, but you don't see what the thing's trying to produce, that ends up, that's a very difficult thing to do. You stop playing force, but you replace it with truth telling. It's interesting, in that text, it talks about, the verse again,
A truthful witness saves lives.
right, so it saves lives. The truth saves lives. Whereas the deceiving or lying is the second one.
It's deceitful.
It's deceitful, right? And so you can even, reality is when there's not truth, life is degraded in a significant way. Exodus 23, 1-3.
Not spread false reports. Do not follow the crowd and believe all. When you give testimony against us, do not pervert justice by signing with the crowd. Do not show favoritism or make falsehood.
And what do you hear there? It is talking about the lost. Definitely. It's talking about probably a more formal situation. And in those verses, what are the pressures that can come upon someone to shade the truth or distort it?
Peer pressure.
What?
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure, the crowd, sort of the mob, right? And then of course it talks about showing favoritism. So you protect the people you like. Sometimes it's fear. I don't want to offend the wrong people. And, the case becomes, deeply problematic. Right? And of course we see this in our own legal system today and in the past, where if you're wealthy, witnesses have been paid off to shake the truth. Right? And a poor person doesn't have the money to hire the high-priced attorney and then to pay off everyone or all of the experts so you have this inequity. And the inequity is degraded if we're not telling the truth. Anything else about those verses?
The first one, you should go correctly.
I've got secret information. Do you see, speaking of that, do you see this happening today on the internet? Much. I mean, it's unbelievable. I don't think any of you have done this to me. I have gotten a lot of emails from people, well-meaning people in the church, who got emails, something off some website somewhere, telling me about some horrible thing that's happened, and only to find out 3 weeks later none of it was true. Thankfully, I usually when someone sends me these, sometimes I don't even say thank you. But even things that might sound reasonable and believable, like I've gotten emails, that 47 believers in the country of Sudan were killed for their faith, but it wasn't true. And that is you have this patience. All right, let's move on to Leviticus 5:1.
Anyone sees that he is refuse to testify against his witness, or if they see that comes out of evidence in spirit, he shall not raise or
This is the second verse of the connect.
he says or.
We read it. We'll be
Anyone touches, anyone touches anything that
I thought so, yeah. So what does this verse say? So this takes the command to not bear false testimony further. Because what does it say? What does it say if you know something, you've been asked to testify, and you decide not to? That is condemned in that verse. In other words, bearing false witness, yes, that's distorting something. But it's also true, in this same vein, connected to this command. If you know about something, and you just sit there, and where you're supposed to say something, that God also looks pretty dimly at that. You knew something about something, you were a witness of something, but rather than correct the injustice or shine a light on the injustice, you're quiet. Now, what does that sound like? The average New Yorker. You're walking down the street, crime is happening around you, put your head down, keep walking, don't say anything, move on, right? I'll tell you a funny story. Bob and his wife, Leslie, took Denise and I to New York City the very first time in our lives. Very late fall of 1989, we went to the Christmas Spectacular Radio City Music. I was born in Oklahoma, and Denise was born in Louisiana. We had never been to New York City. Bob and Leslie were in training us on the way up to New York City on what not to do in New York City. Put your blinders on. And he said, whatever you do, don't look anybody in the eye. Rule 1. Rule 2, don't take anything that someone offers you. And if something really is bad going on, don't sit there and try to solve it. Just keep moving or you'll get dragged in. All right? So I thought, I didn't know anything about New York City. I'm from Oklahoma. I've never lived in some other big city like New York. Now, I did kind of think, well, that sounds Christian. Just don't walk anybody, don't look at anybody.
What church did I move to?
Yeah. And I was like, well, I don't know. The music director is kind of not a real friendly guy. But what happened is the first subway thing we went down into, there was a guy that was pinned down. There was you probably remember this. The New York City Transit police officer had a guy pinned down and was actively trying to get stuff out of this guy's mouth. They probably had drugs in his mouth. He was trying to get it out of his mouth. And of course, Bob said, don't look, just keep moving. Well, I did what an Oklahoman did. I just went, wow! looks like they might be struggling with something. They look unhappy, or maybe they've said something that makes you think they're struggling spiritually. You know, you live with it. I'm not going to pursue it. Or maybe, what? Someone else will do it. That's the pastor's job anyway, so, you know. Or you see, you know, maybe you're in a small group and there's a little bit of a tension with two people. And you just ignore it. I don't want to get involved. I think that would be an extension of a violation of not bearing false witness in which you see something you deal with. And you don't deal with it. In a sense, you're burying the truth of the situation to the detriment of your neighbor. It's not loving your neighbor. Deuteronomy 19, 15 to 21.
A single witness shall not suffice against the person for any crime or any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on evidence of two witnesses or of three witnesses shall a charge be established. And if a malicious witness arises to accuse a person wronged him, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priest and the judges who are in office in that day. The judges shall inquire into the case, and if the witness is false, then he shall present him as he has meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil of the witness, and the rest shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not move. It shall be light for light, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand.
So what does God have to say about a false witness? Not complete things. I mean, a false witness, it will be evaluated and judged. Can you imagine if that would happen overnight in the United States? There wouldn't be enough jails. And some of us would be in that jail, right? I mean, you know, we shared something that was false. We got the story wrong, right? What else is important from that Deuteronomy 19 that talks about the value of witnesses? What else did you need? How many witnesses do you need? At least 2, and then 3, that's preferable, right? Now, this is difficult because we know that some crimes and some serious abuse takes place and there's only, well, there's the victim and then there's the perpetrator. That's really hard, right? But it does suggest that when we deal justly and what the criminal court should be, but even those of us who are working on a situation, multiple witnesses is kind of important to make sure that we can establish what really happened. What's amazing is that one malicious witness in our context can be believed, acted upon, and we think that's okay. But it's really different, right? You want to establish something. I think God is a little more patient with a situation that's unjust, but is in the process of being proved, than a situation where one witness says one thing, everybody believes it, and then the person who's been accused is going to be in trouble. It's painful. It's painful. I don't know if you all remember, when I was in middle school, but often in middle school, one person in your lunchroom could accuse you of something the whole school knew by the next class period, and you were in big trouble. You couldn't get your name back. It happens in a church. My dad's a pastor. It's terrible. Junior religion. And all of a sudden, without proper validation, the community is gone. We're a little more positive here. Ephesians 4:15.
Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to be loved in every way, who is the head.
tells me to go and tell them. I have to hold her hand and say, Jesus is calling you home. But yeah. I mean, another way we do this is excessive flattery. We flatter somebody to get in good with them. We don't deal with any of their problems. We over-aggrandize whatever it is. That's another way we don't tell someone the truth. And it creates real problems. I can see this as I wouldn't say this in public, but my granddaughter's 3, and I have illustrations about the spiritual life from her. She's 3, and it is sad. Thankfully, she's only 3. She can't drive. Her English is not that great yet. But she's 3, she's an only child. And she sometimes, in my opinion, her parents don't always discipline her the way I would have disciplined her. Now when I'm the grandfather, there's no discipline. Whatever is fine, but I look at them and go, you create a problem here. So my 3-year-old now has become basically convinced that she is the center of the universe. All things revolve around her. And she even called me video on my birthday a couple weeks ago. And she said, "Happy birthday, Papa." And then her father was trying to get her talking, and she goes, "I'm done talking to you." But you can flatter somebody and not talk to them honestly, and you can create a monster, whether they're 3 or 83.
So you can speak the truth without.
Yeah, that's another way to denigrate them, right? The truth. Because you make it very difficult for someone to listen to the truth. You might be saying something really right, but if it's just negative all the time, you come across as a negative, people can't. It's hard to do. It's important to. Truth gets lost in different ways, and sometimes just the manner of your speaking. Someone read Ephesians 4:25.
Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another.
So part of again, this gets back to the 10 Commandments, part of why these commandments are important is it's regulating and guiding how you live together. And if you have a community of lies, it's really difficult to have community. You can't do it. You can't do it. I remember speaking to a friend of mine, because I think America, we're heading there. Maybe we're already there. I sanitized the history of America a little bit, but I was speaking to a Romanian family whose family members were very much in power when the communists were in power under Nicolae Ceausescu before he was taken out in Christmas 1989 and 1990. But they were describing that nobody in the Communist Party echelon, nobody from the top to the bottom could tell the truth about anything. It was all politics, and you didn't know who was, you couldn't believe anything that was said. And so in spite of the fact that this person got promoted and had a good job, and compared to the average Romanian, made a lot of money, it was a disaster. You didn't know who to trust. You didn't know what was true. You didn't know if the next minute you would be promoted, and a day later they'd come in and put you in jail. It's a horrible way to live with that, but that's the way it is, and that's the way the church can be. Unfortunately, if we allow lies, flattery, not telling the truth, not confronting, not speaking the truth enough, it destroys that world.
So I guess it's obvious, this is limited to Christianity.
Right?
I mean, because if we
legalistic, all right? They had kind of at least a worldview. Of course, what did they say about Jesus? We have a law. So what's interesting, they had a law that was misapplied. No love, no grace, no multiple witnesses that agree. They violate the law which they believed in, and the truth literally got crucified. Pilate is a postmodern politician, but what is truth? And the net result is Jesus Christ, the truth, was crucified. All right, enough of this. We got to get to the last one, covetousness. Let's go back to Exodus 20. Verse 17, someone read the last commandment. This is it. This is the last one.
Do not desire another man's house. Do not desire his wife, his slaves, his cattle, his donkeys, or anything else that you build.
It's great. So this is the commandment you got covered. And I first want to give you there's different ways of coveting. In a capitalistic society, you covet someone because you want what your neighbor has. They got a Jaguar, you want a Jaguar. They got to go to Europe, you want to go to Europe. Have you ever thought about what it's like if you live in a socialist country, a non-capitalist society? Do you know how coveting works in that society? You ever heard of the story? I learned this also in Romania. So in Romania, they were talking to me, and they were just saying, yeah, in America, you guys envy and covet what your neighbor has. In Romania, well, we don't have very much. Right? So my neighbor doesn't about what Paul is saying. I would have not known that it was wrong to covet unless the law had said thou shalt not covet. But it's also true that the law does not, the law has the power to expose your sin, but it doesn't really have the power in and of itself to change you. We get to this commanding that it can help you see the problem. But if you want to stop coveting, I don't think if you walk around with a little note card that says do not covet and read it 20 times a day, I mean, that's not wrong. But that, I don't think there's going to be enough power to keep you moving along with that. So it's interesting. Paul didn't understand he was covetous until God's law told him he was covetous. But that law couldn't produce non-covetousness in his heart. It simply condemned him. Ephesians 5:5. Covetousness is idolatry, and then it says, if you continue in that, you have no part in becoming an heir in the kingdom. Yikes. God takes covetousness very seriously. And I would say, in particular, in the culture that we live in, with materialism being used, this is like normal. This is like a normal sin. It's internal. Nobody really knows if you're covetous or not. But it's there, and God says it's idolatry and says it's serious. Let's look at Colossians 3:5.
Put to death, therefore, what is earthly, you sexual immorality, purity, passion, evil desire, covetousness, which is idolatry.
So again, covetousness is called idolatry. Normally we think of idolatry as something else, put something else in front of God. Covetousness, simply wanting something that's not yours, desiring it. Wanting something that someone else has. It's called idolatry. God is very, very believes this is a serious offense. James 1:14.
For each person is tempted when they are dragged away by the evil desire and lust.
So in this text, Jesus talks about the evil desires that lurk in all of our hearts. When that desire grows, it starts to mature, and it becomes sin, and then sin, when it's fully grown, brings forth death. This kind of covetousness can consume our hearts, can consume our lives. So, well, we're running out of time, but I'll ask you this question, and I'll answer it if you don't answer it. But what is the antidote, biblically, to covetousness? Be happy with your lot. Another way to put that, to be content. Contentment is the absence of covetousness. I accept what God gives me. I rejoice in it. I'm thankful for it. So I'm going to close with this. This is the Apostle Paul. He's speaking. He's in jail when he writes the book of Philippians, right? So he's in jail because of him preaching the gospel. He's been rocks have been thrown at him. He's been beaten, all for Christ. And here's what he says: for Philippians 4:11-13. Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. how to abound in any and every circumstance. I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. The antidote to covetousness is to learn to be content with the good things that God has given you and to be content with the things he has not given you. To be thankful in plenty and in want, when things are going great, when things are really tight, when your health is good, when your health is not so good. And being content in Christ is sort of the antidote to covetousness. Because otherwise, the covetousness, wanting what others have, can really rule your heart. And it's very subtle. I like to think of myself, just find a little illustration. I'm not as motivated by money as other people are. So you can be happy as a pastor. I'm not worried about my salary. If they stop paying me, I might not notice for months. Don't tell the personnel team that. I'm going to save some money. My wife will notice, and it would be problems. But and I'm not that motivated by money per se. Okay. However, it's very subtle. Even this week, I'm thinking about this week. I've been playing my trumpet a lot more. The last 3 weeks I've been playing. I actually sounded amazing for me last night. Those are my words, but they're true. True words, right? Bare false witness. I'm not very false witness. I sounded great. I'm not saying I sound great in front of the church, but I have this trumpet. I have a medium quality trumpet. Okay, it's like driving a Hyundai. It's not a Jaguar. It's not an old, beat up car from 30 years ago. It's nice. But I sounded so good. I found myself going to this music store in New Jersey, and I was looking at the trumpets that they had for sale. And honestly, I kind of wanted one of those. In fact, there was 3 of them. And in fact, if you'd like to help me on that, I'm kidding. But I realized, okay, money doesn't motivate me so much, but this can easily devolve into serious covetousness. So I really like that. I do have another weakness. I have coveted people's libraries. I love books. My wife and I, the one weakness we have is books. Okay, we live in a townhouse. It's nice. I love it. It's fine. But it's a modest townhouse. It's way overpriced. Because why? Because it's in New Jersey. It's idiotic. Okay? I have neighbors who just sold their townhouse for so much money. It's unbelievable. 1,400 square foot in a 30-year-old townhouse is selling for a crazy number. Anyway, we can easily get our minds wrapped up, and I got wrapped up in trouble. I could get myself wrapped up in books. I could probably go into chapter 11 with books in my house. There's books everywhere, the second floor. But I think for all of us, that question you have to ask yourself as you close: are you growing and learning to be content with Christ in whatever lot He's given you? To be content with Christ plus nothing else. That's something that I think the law of covetousness is driving you to. It's not just trying to say stop coveting. Okay, that's good. But it's can you learn to be content in Christ plus nothing else? All right, see you next week at the project at 10:30, and then next week after that, you're either going to go to discipleship, which you got to sign up for, or you're going to go to the public policy class, or you are going to end up in a grief class, helping process grief. These are all